Hey everyone, this is Simran, and you're listening to Fuck, Marry, Kill, a podcast from Sister Song Women of Color Reproductive Justice Collective. Today we're talking to Caroline Reis from Flossy, which is a sex toy company, and I'm so excited to be here talking about pleasure with my wonderful colleague and friend.
Can't. I'm stoked to have a conversation with you. It really feels like a joy.
Caroline, have you played Fuck, Marry, Kill before?
Oh yeah.
You get the vibes of somebody who's played it like a lot.
An embarrassing amount. Yeah, hit me with it.
Okay, Fuck, Marry, Kill, vibrators, lube, and your absolute favorite porno, your go-to, the one you go back to.
Oh my gosh. I had no idea we were going to be in the pleasure territory for Fuck, Marry, Kill because that makes things way harder. You know what? Recently discovered CBD intimacy suppositories, and I put that in the lube category, but it has totally changed my pleasure experience.
Wait, that's so cool. I've never heard of that.
I'll send you guys some. I think that for me, I would choose lube because there's such a huge misconception around, like, I see lube as a pleasure product and like just on par with something that can be used like a vibrator. Because, you know, we think about like, okay, have you read Come As You Are, Emily Nagoski?
I have not.
Oh, I'm also going to send you a copy of that. Yeah, so the like Venn diagram, if you imagine the overlap between arousal and lubrication, is like a sliver for most folks with vulvas. And we think about like arousal for people with penises. If you're really, really hard, you're oftentimes really, really aroused. But you can be really wet and not be aroused at all with a vulva. And vice versa, you can be super wet but not aroused at all. And I think there's a ton, like when we do a lot of in-person Flossy kind of pleasure product education events, lube is such a big misconception. It's like, well, why would I need that? Or, oh, I don't really know. And there's so many different types of lube. So I'm going to choose lube because that gives me silicone, oil, water, CBD, etc. As long as I can have multiple lubes within my lube category.
I like it. Yeah, you can definitely marry all the lubes in this situation.
Okay, fab.
Okay, what about fucking kill?
Oh God, I'm just gonna. Oh,
I was like, you lied to me. You've never played this game.
Forgot. I would marry lube for sure. I would. God, I would fuck vibrators. Oh my God, for sure. I think. Wait, no. How am I gonna do this? No. I don't know. I can't kill any of them.
Dang, your favorite porno is that good?
Well, okay, so I have some really great like ethical erotica that I don't think I have like one specific. I think I'm gonna kill porno only because there's not one that comes to mind that I'm like, I go back to that every single time. I like a little diversité, and I can't choose one that would really live in that category. So yeah, marry lube, fuck vibrators, kill.
I like it. I feel pretty similarly. Well, yeah, I think I feel similar.
Well, yeah, what's yours?
I think I feel the same. My thing, I don't know, I might marry vibrators mostly just because I don't want to go back to jerking off analog. Like, I'm not like the 1600s, you know? I don't know. I just feel like I've leveled out of that. I've aged out. And honestly, I think it's like probably bad for me because I don't know if I could do it anymore. Like, I think I would get tired. Like, I feel like I have.
I know.
I always said this, like, ever since I started having sex with other people with vaginas and vulvas, I've become a meninist. Like, I have so much more appreciation for, like, that motion is really hard. like wearing a strap on. Oh my God. I'm like, that is so hard. I'm like, come already or don't, whatever.
100%. And it's so easy to be like, oh, like, I don't need a vibe. There's so much like shame within even like the sex toy industry of like, well, this type of vibrator is better than that one because it mimics more like natural hand gestures. And it's like, if we're going to use Uber to get to from point A to point B, why do I need to be horse and buggying I don't need to be doing that.
Exactly.
Okay, well, we're in alignment.
We're in alignment.
Yep. Mm-hmm. I'm glad we started off there.
Perfect. Well, can you give us a little context? Who are you? What is Flossie? How did it start?
Yeah, so I am a dancer, doula, sex toy slinger. Never imagined I would start a sex shop in a million years. I was always the one in my friend group that was definitely curious, definitely open. And a lot of times because of that, I would get labeled as like, oh, well, Caroline's really kinky. Like, she's pretty like out there and adventurous. And I would always get so frustrated because that wasn't like a label for me that I felt like I identified with. But I just genuinely didn't understand why we couldn't talk to each other about masturbation and if you do it, when you do it, how you do it, etc. And it felt like such a weird, like shrouded in shame topic. So that was always something that for me has been a curiosity in conversation. I've been kind of like the poker of my friend group. Like, yeah, well, why don't we do that? And then, of course, working in the doula space, I've been super exposed to and passionate about reproductive health. But, you know, like pleasure continues to be, even within the reproductive health landscape, pleasure continues to be this sidebar, still kind of not centered in the conversations about like bodies, anatomy, reproductive health, etc. So it really started from Flossie, started from a shitty experience in a sex shop in Brisbane. I only ever owned one tiny little trusty bullet vibrator that I bought as like a let's go get a sex toy with a couple of friends in my early 20s. And I honestly can't believe that I didn't own a vibrator before that. But it fried because of the wattage conversion when I moved from the US to Australia. I lost like a hairdryer, I lost a curling iron, many other items because the wattage is absolutely insane in Australia. And I thought, you know what, this is pre-COVID, like just months before COVID started. I thought this would be a perfect opportunity for my partner and I to go into a sex shop together and use it as like a exploration opportunity. Like, okay, what kind of, if we see things around in the store, maybe we wouldn't normally think to bring that up in conversation, but like, hey, I've actually been really curious to try this out. Like, how does that fit for you? Using the experience in the store as like a exploration activity and kind of something for fun. So, you know, sorted like best sex shop in Brisbane near me. We only lived there for like 6 months. Sorry, I'm also battling. I'm like week 2 of this blah sickness.
Oh, that sucks.
A little bit of a lingering cough. Yeah, so best review sex shop. And it was like, okay, not that there's not some great sex shops out in the world, but this was your classic, like back door, downstairs, entry. And even just to get into the shop, you have to navigate through like 3 weaves of like barricades because you can't just, of course, glance into a sex shop and see what's in it. It's all like hidden behind barriers. So you have to walk in and, of course, be like confirmed that you're over 18. And it is like musty carpet smell. There's like dust collecting on all the lube containers. They're still selling porn on VHS tapes, which is honestly just impressive.
Oh my God.
That people are still purchasing porn on VHS. And mind you, like gay marriage wasn't legalized until 2015 in Australia. So there's still a couple lingering things like that kind of stem from this like British influence that make Australia this slightly more like conservative feel. So I would say like of the sex scene, certainly sex shops are also stuck a bit in the dark ages. So this was like, yeah, kind of the worst of the worst. Your classic if you imagine a sex shop. And then you walk over to the wall of products and it's like some of the packaging is turning yellow because it's been sitting on the peg since like 2001. It's like, you know, pink, sparkly, Octopussy 9000. And the shop assistant slides up and is like, okay, so what kind of play are you into? And very creepily. And anyways, long story long, it was the opposite of this experience that I imagined of like, hey, let's go learn together. Let's go explore. Let's go kind of see what things might be of interest to us that we wouldn't normally talk about. And then just decided to buy something to get out of the store as quick as I could. So started chatting with a friend of mine and I was like, why does the sex shop experience suck so much? And especially for folks with vulvas, we started learning like diving deep into the research around 70% of sex product companies are run by men designing products for women. There's also zero regulation in the sex toy industry about what materials products need to even be made from. So oftentimes you get like the absolute crappiest of the crap silicone that's really porous and it can harbor bacteria. And so even when it's cleaned, it can actually like reinfect folks. So not only the material quality, but huge lack of representation for people that are profiting off of selling pleasure and who are designing products. And that's why you get these like very overtly kind of feminine, hot pink type toys, you know, called the womanizer. And it turns out it's like 3 frat guys selling pleasure products and like, you know, buy this female sex toy and forget about your partner. So the whole industry, we were just like, wow, this is really shocking. The lack of quality products and the lack of brands that are creating products that are really representative of end users. And focusing on, I think like a big piece of it for us too is not that like, you know, sex toy is going to lead to someone's satisfactory sex life. It is one of many tools towards connecting better with yourself. You know, I think like it's easy to sort of sell sex toys as this quick fix, but it could be like a really supportive friend. It could be an amazing experience in a dance class. Like there's so many things, so many avenues towards connecting with our bodies. And so really for us, Flossy was kind of, yes, we want to curate like the best of the best sex toys. And have an element of like the sex ed that you never had. You know, we learn a lot of fear mongering in our sex ed classes about how not to get pregnant. There's only 17 states in the US that require medically accurate sex ed. And not to mention the abysmal state of any sort of like empowerment or centering of pleasure in that conversation. So that is a really long way to say that Flossy is a space for people to learn about and experience pleasure via sex toys as that tool that feels good. Like ultimately an experience that feels really, really good. We have e-commerce. We envision this in-person retail space, but when we started, COVID was just ramping up. And now we offer curated in-person Flossy experiences around the US and Australia. So we have a team of pleasure guides. We've got 7 folks around the US and Australia that are running these experiences for us. Not like, you know, your salesy MLM, but really like a pleasure education experience. Place for people to come together, to converse, to connect, and to have some of the conversations that we don't have in our normal daily lives surrounding pleasure. So that's, yeah, sorry to ramble, but
no, please,
here we are.
Please. Wait, what does MLM mean?
Like a multi-level marketing campaign. So you can imagine like a Tupperware party where you come in and someone gives you a sales pitch. Like there are a lot of sex toy parties that are, one, really like crap products, and 2, really focused on selling people something. And so we've designed these kind of like sort of like consciousness raising circles like in the 60s where it's way more focused on conversation. Yes, sex toys are present, but it's not about like, okay, everyone needs to buy something. So yeah, that's an MLM.
I love that.
And that's what we're not.
That's what you're not. I love the premise of the whole Flossy thing, because you're so right. Like, it is scary to go into a sex shop for the first time, and it really doesn't need to be. Like, there's just nothing welcoming about the vast majority of sex shops that I've been into. They either feel like creepy, like adult male centered, that makes me uncomfortable, or they feel like they're hiding and like you should be ashamed that you're going into them. Like, the level of embarrassment that I would feel. I mean, I think the first time it was like, I feel like I've only ever been to sex shops for 2 reasons: as a joke with my friends, or like with a lot of like with a lot of shame and anxiety as it was happening, you know? Like it's just so hard to have a genuinely positive and explorative experience.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean that the experience that is the norm for buying sex toys, it mimics the societal shame that we have around permission to even experience, explore, etc., pleasure. And then I think about like shopping online for us. I mean, I'm not an e-commerce nut. I don't get excited about like return on ad spend and how to get people to our website. But it's really hard when you're scrolling through. If you look on like, Amazon, one, not all the products are, even if they say that they're body safe, that's like something that people can just slap on as a marketing ploy. But you're scrolling through like 600 pages of vibrators. And vibrators are like, they're one of the only products that you can't read customer reviews and go like, oh yeah, it gave Sarah S the best orgasm of her life. Everyone's body is so different. How are you supposed to know until you actually try and explore and experiment things with your own body? Like we've just gotten so out of touch with what might feel good for us uniquely. And pleasure products are really, they just take so much exploration for what feels good for you. I don't know if that resonates with you.
But. Yeah, no, it definitely does. And, this is a personal question. I'm so curious to know kind of how your life changed when you decided to embrace this topic that is so full of shame. Like, what were your friends, were your family like, hey, what the fuck? Or were they down with it?
I would say, oh my gosh, it is an ongoing journey. It's not like, okay, I'm at a place of like full embodied empowerment and I don't give a F what people think about it. I just gave a talk at, so because I've moved back to like my hometown area, I just gave a talk at the co-working space that I'm a part of. And it was like, a bunch of people that I don't know at all, but like have heard of. Actually, a couple of people there were like, hey, I think I know your mom. Like, doesn't she live I'm actually live on Bainbridge Island, which is just off of Seattle. And it was some guy that like my mom used to date. And I was like, oh, Jesus, like this is so uncomfortable for me to be putting myself out there to people that like intimately. I think because for me, being in Australia was probably the only container that Flossie could have come to be, because I was so far away from friends, family, anyone that I thought could like judge me. I didn't go to like, honestly, thinking about like happy hour at like the holidays with my like Aunt Sally, I'm like, oh, that's my worst nightmare. And being like, so how's that little business of yours going? I'm like, oh geez. And I have to like pick and choose when I feel like I have the energy to share with people actually what I do. Sometimes I'm like, oh yeah, like I work in reproductive health, and leave it at that. But I've also just gotten a lot more comfortable, like my own internalized shame around trying to like protect and make everyone else around me feel comfortable when I talk about Flossie. And I've realized that like, that's not on me. If somebody feels uncomfortable about me saying that I run a sex toy business, like that's their thing. It's not like for me to own that. So I'm like for sure a recovering people pleaser. Definitely has been a journey for me, but I realized so much of that, like I cannot carry that for other people. And also I don't want to be in a 9-to-5 desk job that like everyone else is doing. It's not what feels fulfilling for me. So I don't know if that.
Yeah, I mean, it's one hell of an unlearning process. Like it really, especially like as women, and I am a recovering, actually, let me not even say that. I'm a people pleaser. And like being able to make people comfortable, like it runs my life. And I know that it does. And so like the fact that to be able to embrace that this is what your work is kind of forces you into the deep end. Like you do have, you're going to make people uncomfortable. And so I imagine the personal journey and the unlearning process has been incredible. And I also feel that way working in reproductive justice, reproductive health. Like there's obviously the safety aspect of it. I get into an Uber, they ask me what I do for work. I'm like, please don't kill me. But also there's also like Thanksgiving, like I talk about sex all day. That's what I do. I talk about sex and reproduction all day. And so being able to have those challenging conversations that make people uncomfortable, like that's your shit. That's not mine.
Totally. And I mean, that's also like what makes someone like you have such a gift for being able to connect with people. And I think like people pleaser gets such a bad rap, but part of what I've loved about Flossie is getting to be like, I don't think it has to be this like abrasive, like, well, accept it or fuck you. Like, also, can I swear? I don't know if that's allowed.
Yeah, it's called fuck, marry, kill. You're fine.
Okay. Well, yeah, you came out with it, right? You can say it, but I can't. That's how it goes. Yeah, I mean, I think there's a way to like have direct and hard conversations, but also get to be like a conduit for bringing people along and having them Having it not be so like othering. I don't need to be like, yeah, well, fuck you if you don't support this. It's kind of like, I don't know, it's been interesting for me to explore the tact around how I invite people, because I would love for Flossy to be something that even people with like the most shame or kind of like religious unpacking. I've had a lot of people come and approach Flossy, and because our approach maybe is a little bit more like less overtly hypersexual, we talk a lot about like education. We talk a lot about pleasure beyond just sexual. We talk about topics that aren't just like sex toys and making you orgasm. We position it as like a core part of health. It makes people that might otherwise not be able to like walk into your corner store sex shop feel comfortable approaching Flossy, I hope. So I don't know.
Yeah. I love what you're saying about how like it's sexual pleasure is obviously a thing, but it's not the only form of pleasure. Like there's so many ways to connect with our body. And I remember the first time I heard that, I was at our Let's Talk About Sex conference in 2022 in Dallas. And I remember there was a sex educator who was giving a talk, and she was like, pleasure doesn't need to be sexual. Like, here are all the ways I engage with pleasure in my body. And I had truly never thought about that word outside of a sexual context. And so I'd love to hear more about kind of what pleasure means to you in the broad sense.
Yeah, I think pleasure, oh gosh, it's so expansive, and I think that the more I learn about it, the more I'm like, holy cow, it is like a deep well of exploration. But I think that for me, it's like a sense of, it's a feeling, it's a state of enjoyment, fun. It's really like, but for me, it's what makes me feel alive. And sometimes that can be for a really fleeting moment. But I would also associate with pleasure with being in the present moment. And for me, I've only been able to really be in the present moment when I'm totally in my body. So it's like the moments that kind of make us pause and remind us to interact completely with the world around us. I think of it as, I've been exploring a lot with the word embody and embodiment. And I think right now we're kind of in this like crisis of disembodiment and disconnection from how much wisdom we have in our bodies. But yeah, I would say pleasure is like this idea of complete, like, what is happening for me right now? How can my thoughts, my emotions, my like sensations give me insights to what I'm experiencing, what my reactions are. So I think of it as, yeah, embodiment. I think also along with embodiment comes autonomy, and that's so core to the conversation around reproductive health, reproductive justice, what's going on in the world right now. Yeah, I think of it as this like complete present aliveness. And that's so beyond, like we think of pleasure. Well, we'll go there. That's kind of how I would shape it up.
I really love that idea of it like being completely present. I think that's a really nice way to view it and think about it. Because when I was asking that question, I was like, shit, I have no idea what she's gonna say. I have no idea what I would say. Like, I'm like, what is pleasure? Like, I have no idea what's about to come out of your mouth. So that is a really, really cool way to frame it. Because you're right, like to be able to be that present like requires you to connect with your body in some way, and that can be through sexuality, that can be through orgasm, but it can also be through like closing your eyes and dancing. I know there's this thing, like ecstatic dancing, I think is what it's called. Like I have a friend who goes and does that, and it's just like you close your eyes and like fuck the world. You just do your thing, move however you feel like moving, like no perception, anything like that. I think that's so cool.
Yeah, and I mean, like to your point about, even if we think about sexual pleasure and orgasm, our brains are our number one largest sex organ. And when we're in, like, it's almost like an oxymoron that when we're in our brain, when we're thinking like, okay, how does this feel? Like, should I be orgasming? Has it been taking me too long? Has it like, am I getting enough stimulation? I feel like I should have already, this position usually makes me orgasm. Why am I not orgasming? Like when we are in that mental state, it almost takes this like complete disconnection from our brain and getting into our bodies to even be able to like experience pleasure. When we think about like getting in touch with our breathing, getting in touch with like actual, what is the sensation? Like, what am I feeling right now? Oh, it's like really rich. It's really soft. It's really like hard and like full, whatever those like sensations are. I find that I'm only able to actually like submit. And a lot of times when people have like, challenges around orgasm, it's because there's such a lack of being in your body. But that's why like pleasure is so interesting, because pleasure is not an outcome. Pleasure's not do, pleasure is be. And when we think about orgasm, it is an outcome of pleasure, but exploring this, like, what if we just took outcome and like do totally off the table and we just be, which sounds a bit woo-woo, but I don't know. It's kind of, as I was thinking through it, I'm like, I think that's really like how it shows up for me. Not that I'm fully connected to it all the time, but it is, it's so, there's so much to explore there.
Yeah, the orgasm pressure is so real. Like feeling like,
oh my gosh,
like you can't experience that. You can't experience pleasure unless you're going to have an orgasm. And also that like your partner is going to feel bad if they don't give you an orgasm, like, but also feel bad if they don't have an orgasm. And so then everyone's feeling so much pressure and nobody can have a good time. Like, it's so actually being able to enjoy the moment and be like, oh, I'm being intimate with somebody, or I'm being intimate with myself. And like, that is the entire experience, versus like having this end goal is so, it's just so, like you're saying, with the brain being the biggest sex organ, like that really fucks with the brain.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. And then the second that we put any kind of pressure on it, it's like a very quick downward spiral into becoming even more disconnected and even more in your head. And then it's even harder to orgasm. And then the next time that you approach that situation, it's kind of like, like things that we associate with being sexually relevant or that might like arouse us. If we then have sex the next time, that's the neural pathway that's been like set from the previous experience. And so, I mean, it really does take so much work, but ultimately, like we are the only people individually responsible for our pleasure and for our orgasm. It is a lot of expectation to put. I mean, certainly, if you're with a partner or partners and have had like lots of time to explore and understand boundaries and what feels good and communicate, like there is absolutely ways where you can enhance and elevate like the pleasure experience or have a different experience that's super rich with a partner. But it like you can never, I've only ever gotten into trouble when I expect a partner to give me orgasm, or when a partner feels like they should give me orgasm, which don't even get me started in the amount of like shame around bringing a toy into the bedroom, especially in like cis hetero relationships where it's like, well, I thought I was the only thing that could please you. Why would you need a vibrator? Because like, shouldn't I be able to do that?
What about my penis? And then
he starts to explain like, what about my penis? It's like, oh man, like, okay, like, first of all, we never learned an anatomy lesson of how to even engage the like external clitoris. And when we think about penetration, it is penetrating, yes, like can feel really lovely and good, but if we're not integrating the external glans clitoris, for 80% of people's vulvas, it's not even gonna lead to orgasm. It might like, feel good. But it's just like, if we actually explain that, it takes so much of the ego out. We're like, oh, but I need to be responsible for it. But like, oh, you're not gonna orgasm without me. You're gonna like the sex toy more.
Yeah, the ego thing is huge. I think that like, I mean, there's just with the, I feel like it's two sides of the same coin. Like with the shame comes this egotistical aspect of it, where it's like, okay, I'm too ashamed to talk about it and engage with it, but that means that I like haven't had the open and honest conversations necessary to understand other people's bodies. So I'm getting, or my own body. And so I'm getting all my information from the media. I'm getting all my information from the internet. And all of a sudden, like, it's like, porn is not going to teach you what it looks like to actually give somebody an orgasm. It's really just not.
Yeah. And like, we also can't give people too hard of a time, because if you think about where we learn about sex and pleasure, it's literally like sex ed, maybe some conversations with friends about like, oh, how often are you guys having sex? Like, oh, we only have sex, I don't know, once a month. Like frequency somehow equals satisfaction is another myth. And then we go on to learn about sex from like very, cis male heterocentric porn that basically makes it seem like you are a performer. I mean, they are like professional performers. So yes, like when they have sex, there are certain things that are super pro and they make every single noise that's right. And they're obviously doing it to get views and people to watch and for people to become like aroused in the quickest way possible. But when we actually have sex and we're like, I don't know, queefing and a fart slips out, or like, you know, you feel a certain way in your body and you're just like, you know, you laugh or you make a weird sound or you don't want to make sound or you feel like your sound's going to be embarrassing. Like there's just so many things that are not how it is in what we've been taught about sex. But like, where else are people supposed to learn about it? So that's kind of like, that's what I get most excited about with Flossy. It's like, okay, well, what if we just create spaces where people can actually like super openly get to learn and have conversations about like, I've never known what like a suction toy feels like. Okay, let's pass it around. Let's talk about it.
Yeah, tell me more about that educational piece of it. Like, who are you targeting? Who are you hoping to be having these conversations with?
Oh my gosh, literally everyone. I think, there's not, certainly Flossy as a brand has started, and I mean, myself, like female identifying with a vulva, has started as like curating products for folks with vulvas primarily. And it's like really opened my eyes in the last, so we've probably done like maybe now like 40, almost 50 different kind of like in-person pleasure education experiences. I've done a lot of them myself, and recently it's been kind of an interesting, I mean, certainly we have primarily like female identifying folks, groups of like 10, 15 or so, typically like age, I don't know, it's interesting. I would not say like we are targeting this group. It's happened to be groups of folks that like through people that I know and their friends, like kind of similar age group to me. But I've done, I would say, like 28 to like 35. But I also did an awesome Flossy party for a group of like 65, 70-year-olds. And it was like, whew, I need to just sit and learn from you all about what it is like for your body to change through menopause and how that might impact, how you experience pleasure. I've also done like groups of people that have just given birth and I don't have kids myself, and like what that's like, relationship to body, relationship to like how that shifts and changes when it's just like your boobs are a sexual thing, and then you go from like feeding a baby. But like recently it's been interesting. I've had a lot of requests for people to integrate partners into the conversations. Primarily it's been like groups of people as solo individuals that with their partners not present in the room. But then it's like, wait, now I have to go home and like have the added burden of educating my partner on all these things. I'd rather just them like learn alongside me. And we do, yes, we definitely do like pleasure product education, but I find that just having a bunch of like beautiful curated 100% body safe sex toys on the table is a really great opener for way more conversations. Like, oh my gosh, the amount of times we unpack shame and how you feel about your body. What's your internal dialogue narrative? How does that impact how you experience pleasure solo with a partner? Introducing sex toys. It's not just like unpacking the entire shame around that. So it's kind of like sex toy opens up the door for what's attached to the narrative around pleasure. But I would say like truly anyone and everyone is who we want to have these experiences with. It ends up working certainly better for smaller, more intimate kind of 8 to 10 person groups. It's been so much fun.
Yeah, it's like an actual holistic experience. Like I feel like going to a sex shop is just like, oh, you want to buy this item? Great. Like, but we're not going to talk about like the context of how sexuality impacts your life, how you're, like you're saying, your insecurities impact your sexuality, how your relationship with your partner impacts your sexuality. Like sex is so deeply integrated into everything in our lives. And yet I feel like we separate it from everything else. Like, it's like, okay, you can have this great, wonderful career and partner and all these things, and like sex life is like this thing over there that you're not supposed to talk about in the same way, versus being able to see it in the context of your entire life. Like it is just one of the many ways that you experience pleasure, that you take care of your health, that you connect with your partner, that you connect with yourself.
Yeah, we did a event recently in LA for a group called Buy Dinner, and it was so fun to get. We kind of the one our pleasure guide in LA is a phenomenal sex educator, and we kind of guided the conversation around like misconceptions around bisexuality and internalized homophobia and how to how that's seen as this like narrative around being like promiscuous or greedy or not being quote gay enough. Like there's so much. It's really fun to get to tailor experiences towards what the group might be most interested to learn or kind of like the context of them going into an experience. And then sex toys are kind of just like a little cherry on top that are there.
Yeah, I went to a really interesting like sex workshop, kind of like the ones that you're talking about like sexuality after sexual trauma specifically, and being able to reconnect with your body. And it was so impactful, just like really something and what we focused on at the beginning was like touching your wrist, like touching your body in ways that felt good, that had nothing to do with your genitals, just like really just like reconnecting with yourself as a sexual being, but also as like an autonomous sexual being and somebody who has the ability to have control over your sexuality. And it was really like some of the most impactful parts had nothing to do with sex, even though it was all about sex.
Yeah, I love what you said, autonomous sexual being, because it's so core to how like how we can empower the experience of pleasure exploration is like really getting clear on how we show up in an autonomous way. Do we have access to that? Do we what narratives have shaped that for us? Yeah, our own unique context. There's just so much there.
Yeah, so going off of the narratives that shape us, what do you think that mainstream conversations and mainstream media around sex and pleasure are getting wrong and are teaching us?
I think there's so many, but kind of going off of what we were saying before about pleasure being this like needs to happen from one above all that pleasure is just associated with sexual. I think once we start to step back and come up above and really understand pleasure as this complete present embodied experience of sensation and what is going on within our body, we can take it out of just this pleasure context. I think that pleasure we think is often derived from or should be derived from external inputs, but really pleasure, like above all, first and foremost, begins with ourselves. Um, I think it's easy to think that pleasure is like in this always on position, but there's so much around desire and how desire is cultivated, whether, we experience responsive desire, spontaneous desire, and sort of some assumptions about how we should experience pleasure. Should it be this like quick switch? Oh yeah, like I feel really turned on because, oh God, I'm just trying to think of like, the difference between even my partner and I, where, for the average person with a vulva, it takes 20 minutes to even get to the point of becoming aroused. And like I said, with the brain being the largest sex organ, first we have to figure out how to tend to the busyness that is going on in our brain before we can even get to a place of like, yeah, I'm ready to be like open to the experience of sexual pleasure. I think so much of how we talk about pleasure and the words that we use make it seem like pleasure should be earned and not like a fundamental right. And I guess what I mean there is that think about like how we say things like, oh, it's a guilty pleasure. Oh, like you have to earn this feeling good. And pleasure is something that is like should be accessible to us by our own volition at any point and any time. It's really about like being open and available to experiences, not in this like hedonistic kind of body numbing form of pleasure where it's, drugs, entertainment, television, things like that that can make us feel good, yes, but aren't this like it's almost like having like a really like nourishing, and I'm not trying to make this about like healthy food versus unhealthy food, but like something that really just makes you feel like nourished and like energized versus something that feels good in the moment, but also like kind of makes you feel numb. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, that does make sense. And I think that like being able to recognize there's a place for both of them. Like I'm thinking about like alcohol is the first thing that comes to mind. Like, it does make you feel good, or it can make you feel good in the time. It doesn't always. And it can be a really pleasurable experience. It can also feel like ass the next day. And that's not to say that you shouldn't drink. It's just say that it's one type of pleasure, and there's so many other types of pleasures that you can engage with. And so I feel like just having a wide array of ways to tap into pleasure and taking away that guilt piece that you're saying, like the idea that like we should feel guilty for trying to feel good, and that there's inherently something like I feel like there's this idea there's an inherent virtue in things being hard and bad, and thus the flip side of that must be that there's an inherent bad thing about and guilt that has to come with feeling good.
Yeah, or this like, I mean, we're just so entrenched in capitalism that like we gotta work really leaping hard to like earn feeling good. I mean, I used to, like, speaking of guilt, I used to every single time that I masturbated feel like I would, toss the sex toy to the side and feel like, oh my God, just like shameful. I would feel like I did something wrong. I should feel guilty. I wasn't like I still have so much work to do around unpacking like that rest is a radical thing, and just like rest for rest's sake, because I'm so also just running my own business. I can get so attached to like I must be productive at all times. But even like for me, when I masturbate, sometimes I have to check myself, and I'm like, I mean, yeah, there's totally something to be said for a like efficiency, get it done. I just want like a quick release. But there's also something to be said for, as long as like what I'm doing feels really aligned, and I kind of am like able to check in with myself. Like, I do not ever want though to have the feeling of guilt or shame after I'm pleasuring myself. And that used to be like the only thing that I experienced after I would masturbate. Like I wouldn't even want to like touch the sex toy afterwards. I wouldn't even want to like close the porn down so quick so that I forgot that it even happened. There's just so much around shame of experiencing pleasure that I have gone through and still go through.
I appreciate you sharing your own experiences too, because I feel like you're somebody who I would just expect to be like, I'm like, oh yeah, you're the most evolved person on sex ever. And like,
no, my God, no.
I'm like, you run a sex toy business, like, and yet, like, it's like this is what makes us unfortunately impacted by our like society, and this is what like just it is what it is. And like I think about I know that like working in this field, I also have a lot of shame around it and a lot of unlearning to do. And like even like I think I worked in abortion rights for years before I really understood like what an abortion was, before I really like took the time to, because I also just had that stigma around it that I had to unlearn, like everybody does. And so being able to be like, yeah, sure, like you're building this business and also you're doing the work just like everybody else.
Yeah. And just like you said at the very beginning, like, we have this narrative that like pleasure is okay in certain formats, but not okay in others. Like there's actually a lot within the sexual wellness industry of people being like, people selling sex toys that don't vibrate, that shame businesses that sell vibrators. And it's like, no, sex and pleasure are acceptable when you're like using, I have to be careful about how I say these things, but like, when you're using something that's like is more like quote unquote natural or normal, or like a hand, or doesn't vibrate, because it's like it's honestly wild to me that we even talk about certain forms of experiencing self-pleasure being more acceptable than others. Like even when it comes to like the position that you masturbate in, like it's acceptable to like lay on your back, and it might be like weirder or different or wrong to like stand up and masturbate with a sex toy, or I don't know. There's so many different ways that you could slice it, different types of products that you use, and what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. When really like, it's crazy that that's what we're choosing to focus on. There's so many, we need to just let people experience whatever might feel good for them. People are so, myself included, like caught up in what is normal, or like, is this okay? Is this not okay? And that's a lot of what these flossy experiences are about, is like kind of the validation of being around other people to be like, oh yeah, like I also experienced that. Oh my God, like I'm not a crazy person. because we just don't talk about these things enough.
Right. If we don't talk about it, I feel like we all just assume that we're the only ones doing it, and like we're the and like
totally.
Somehow we're doing it weird, like guaranteed, like I'm doing it weird, I look weird, something strange about what I'm doing, like
totally. Like I almost got like carpal tunnel from using a really heavy sex toy and trying to like efficiency masturbate all the time. And I was like, okay, whoa, we have become so detached from experiencing pleasure and not trying to have it be this like outcome focused thing. Because I have, the one, even though obviously I have access to so many sex toys, the one go-to that I always grab for. Anyways, I could go on.
One of my friends just gave herself like nerve damage from whacking it too much. She had to go to the hospital. It was really, not funny, but really funny.
No, but like, so normal. Yeah.
So how do you feel like pleasure is kept from marginalized communities specifically?
Yeah, well, I think it's really worth noting that I identify as a cis, white female, and that's kind of like how I approach and experience pleasure. But I think really like it's really easier to have control over or to dominate people who don't know how to access their own pleasure. And I think because for so long pleasure has been either like controlled or vilified, it's almost taught people that like we've taken on that self-policing into our own lives of then my internal dialogue or narrative, keeping us from exploring our own pleasure. So I think like, if you think about even like sex toys and sex toy design, I think so much about this. There's such a lack of designing products for folks that experience disabilities and don't have the ability to actually like hold a sex toy. There's one sex toy company in, I think it's out of Perth, Australia, that came up with the coolest sex toy design for folks that are paraplegic, and they just came out and announced that they aren't able to fund, so like 2% of funding for female, 2% of all VC funding goes towards female founded brands. Of that 2%, it's like 0.02% that goes towards sexual wellness female founded brands, and then of that 0.02%, how much do you think goes towards people that are trying to design products for folks with disabilities? Like, that are, really trying to create brilliant products. So I think like it's a mechanism of control. And if we can control marginalized communities more by keeping this access to pleasure, to the exploration of pleasure, to keeping it as something that's shameful. There's a quote from, have you read Pleasure Activism by Adrienne Maree Brown?
Yes, Adrienne Maree Brown actually lives in Durham too.
What? Oh my gosh. A true hero of mine. There's a quote in the book by Ingrid LaFleur, and it says, let me just find it. For oppressed people to intentionally cultivate pleasure is an act of resistance. And I love that, because I think that it really is this like, no, this is not going to be a mechanism for maintaining like power and control. This is something that like I'm going to intentionally cultivate and push back against. So I don't know if that kind of answers your question, but I think it's another mechanism of power and control, and who has the power over most marginalized communities, and the lack of education, centering, permission around pleasure is just a leg of that.
Yeah. It's interesting that you talk about power and control, because we were just having we were just doing a recording on environmental justice. And the whole theme was just talking about control and power. And our guest was like, oh, like, I don't know how this happened. Like, our theme is all about control. And I was like, girlie, I think they're all going to be about control. Like, I think that just might be the root here. And so like, yeah, you're so right that like being able to control people's pleasure and control people's access to pleasure is such a power move. Like, it's such like a power like a powerful dominating position to be in, and it's just easier to do that to people who are already vulnerable, which is really scary, and are already vulnerable to not being able to feel like they can access pleasure. When you're in survival mode, it's so hard to get in touch with your body and get in touch with yourself from a pleasure perspective, because you're just trying to make it through the day. And it's interesting.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, please.
When you were talking about the people with disabilities and experiencing pleasure, I had read something about the infantilization of people living with disabilities, and just the way that like we don't see them as sexual beings. Like we don't see them as like people with Down syndrome can have full sexual lives. Like people with all kinds of different disabilities can have full sexual lives. But when somebody needs extra support and extra accessibility needs, all of a sudden we're like, oh no, you are not a full adult, and thus you cannot have sexual desires. And so being able to actually like create sex products and sex toys and like just sex education for people who are living with disabilities, like that is something that is, I mean, I know it's a spot that I am not as engaged with and I want to be.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's a whole nother rabbit hole we could go down. There's just like, we just need to think about like how our world is designed. Like, when you think about sex toys and how, I'm just opening up this one called Ziggy, and it's the world's first sex toy for all bodies, and it's designed like a bike seat, but it can like magnet together to go around a penis. It can flip. It's like creating something that's super it's like a multi tool.
Cool.
It can go around a penis. It can fit into like pants so that it can be completely hands free. I think that, but I mean, you're spot on that. We've decided who is allowed to be a sexual being and who is not, as a mechanism of control. And I mean, I see it definitely firsthand in just within the sex toy industry. And there's so much more there to bring awareness around.
Yeah, and like when you were talking earlier about sexual autonomy specifically, I was thinking about like the difference between being sexualized versus versus like embracing your own sexual autonomy and yourself as a sexual being. And I think in a lot of communities of color, like you're either hypersexualized or you are seen as somebody who does not have a sexuality, and there's no in between. And so it's really challenging to be able to express your sexuality outside of fetish spaces, outside of being seen as just like a sexualized object rather than a full person who's experiencing sexuality. And so I really, as a woman of color who has lots of other women of color in my life, I know it's extremely challenging to not feel like you want to compartmentalize kind of your sex life from like the world that you live in. Like I remember my sister saying something about that, because she's brilliant. She's in medical school. Like she wants to, and being respected means a lot to her, like being able to be seen as smart and thoughtful and all these things. And so she was really scared to like, she started dating this boy in her medical school, and she was really scared like, once I start having sex with him, will he no longer respect me? Will he no longer see me as a equal, as a colleague, all these things? And I'm like, wow, it's so scary to think that like sex can have the power, especially for women and for women of color, to like take us down a few notches.
And that like somehow that if we I listened to this interview with who was it? I think it was Emma Chamberlain, and she was saying how like she specifically has designed her entire brand about being like the least sexualized that she possibly can. And it was such an interesting conversation about like making even the way that she shows up in like the faces that she makes feel like this kind of like childlike, non-sexual, non-feminine brand. But as she was talking about it more, like I think she was realizing through the conversation how much she had like suppressed this part of her to maintain not being sexualized by the world. And that you can have like this, there's so much more richness and complexity, and it's not one or the other. But yeah, you're absolutely right that when you walk into a sex shop, you see it literally everywhere, the amount of like black and brown folks that are used on packaging and fetishized. It's really like, it's shocking. I went to a sex toy conference in Miami, and oh man, the amount of products and even like the noises that certain products make, the titles or the names of products. You just look at like product naming and how much it plays into this like fetishization of marginalized communities is really, really shocking.
Yeah, I remember seeing something recently about like I think Pornhub. Well, Pornhub just got banned in North Carolina, so not that that's the porn site to be on, but still, I was kind of like like if you try to go on it, it's like this like long note being like your state no longer allows Pornhub. Please like try to travel to a different porn site. Yeah. So I don't know. Censorship makes me always think some type of way, but I was. What was I about to say though? Pornhub. Oh. I remember seeing a graphic that was talking about the number one porn categories based on states. And like most of it was like,
oh God,
you know, like a stepsister, stepdaughter, like the classic stuff, like like anime, like was in California, I think. Like it was just like different states having it. But the amount of states that the number one looked up porn category was trans was unbelievable to me. And especially looking at the states and them and comparing the states that had that as their number one like fetish category, and then adding on the fact that these were also states that were having major anti-trans bills being proposed to legislation that year. Like that is such a fascinating and scary thing to kind of look at.
Yeah, and I think the more that we push things the more that things are on the periphery, the more that it has the potential to like associate with things that are secret, private, dirty, wrong. Not that I'm saying that about the trans community, but like in that state of folks that there is a sentiment around not supporting trans rights, like that it is this like elusive, sexualized kind of category that is so taboo. And when we make things really taboo like that, it makes sense that there's also this massive amount, number one porn category. And yeah, incredibly scary.
But yeah, that's so true that they're connected. Like the more that, like, are you watching that because trans people are sexy because they are, or are you watching it because it's a taboo category of porn the way that the stepsister one is, and so like it's filling this need for you the same way that the legislation is filling the same thing, which is to other trans people and to make it clear that they are not full people in your mind.
Yeah. We need another 4 hours to unpack this.
Oh, I know. So what advice would you give, and how do you think people can all get in touch with our pleasure?
I think like in the simplest form, it is about tuning to your senses and sensations. So many of us we move through life in living out of touch with our bodies, and it is truly like, whether that's rest, whether that's pause, whether that's smell, touch, feel, I think attunement to the senses and sensations. And I would say off the back of that, building a pleasure practice is a continuous cultivation. Like I said at the very beginning, the more that I've tended to my experience of pleasure, my attunement. There's a really great book. Have you read Slow Pleasure by Euphemia Russell?
I have not. You got a lot of stuff to send me.
Girl, I am going to send you some things.
This was all a ploy to get you to send me gifts.
DVD deposit. Yeah. I wanted you on so you could tell me about all the things that I need, and I will send them to you. No, but I really will send you this. It is such, I have it on the back of my toilet. Actually, I was just reading it this morning. And it's all activities about how to explore your pleasure spectrum. And there's a couple in here. She uses the acronym RAIN, which is recognize, acknowledge and allow, investigate, and nurture. So it's a like recognize, a pausing and tuning into our bodies and recognizing that we are experiencing sensation. acknowledge and allow the sensation to just exist by being with them without trying to change it. So this, I think the other important piece about this is that pleasure can also allow for negative sensations. It's an attunement to any kind of sensation. And then investigate is the I. So what's your perception of the sensation? Does it have like information or a specific story attached to it? And a particular sensation in one part of the body doesn't necessarily, like, everyone's experience of sensation is completely different. And then nurture. So thinking about doing this in a really soft and nurturing way with tenderness. Tuning into your sensations doesn't mean, it's really like stepping into however that shows up. So I think that's kind of the simplest way. Building a pleasure practice is not about, like, spicing up your sex life or like having better sex. It's about rituals that make you feel sensual in your body. I think about, like, for me, I love getting ready, like putting on some sparkly, shiny things. I just went to a Luna in Seattle, and I like absolutely am obsessed with her energy and music. And I went with just this, like, stand in the crowd, move my body, watch her, like, complete embodiment, and just feel like, gosh, like so sexy in myself right now. Yeah, I think that's where I would start.
That sounds awesome. That sounds really fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like that's a really great place to start. It's like mindfulness. Like, it's like just being able to connect with yourself and be as present as possible. And I like what you said about, like, that will also invite negative feelings. Like, if you're going to commit to being in touch with yourself, that does require you to be able to commit to also dealing with the negative things that are going to come up. And you have to, those are two sides of the same coin. And because, like, the negative feelings are what make the positive feelings so special.
Yeah. It's like a water faucet. If you turn it all the way off, you're not experiencing anything. But if you turn it all the way on, you're going to get some shitty stuff and some great stuff and some hard stuff and some trauma that comes up. And that all is, so much of that. The holisticness of what we're sensing and experiencing, allows us to just understand in a more deep way how we want to show up in the world and what feels good for us.
So the last question that I have for you is, why is pleasure a reproductive justice issue?
Well, y'all are pros in reproductive justice, and I mean, it's really so much about allowing people to make decisions about their bodies, their families, their futures, without considering about any kind of differences in, like, race, income, class, sexual orientation, like even immigration status. And so I see pleasure as a fundamental part of, like, decision about body, integration into body. It's kind of like the precursor step of exploration about our body and what might even feel good for us. How do we, like, experience the world? We can't make, a decision about what's like a hell yes and what's a hell no without first exploring what is going on in my body. Like, do I feel like this is a hell yes right now, or do I feel like this is like an absolute no for me? So I think I see pleasure as like the precursor exploration step to complete autonomy.
Yeah, you have to know yourself to be able to know what you want and how to and then you have to know what you want to be able to articulate what you want. And so it does start with that exploration.
Yeah. And, like, I mean, just starting by, like, I feel like self-care and self-love are so overused, but I think it's one of the simplest things that we deny ourselves. And so when we start, like, practicing really, like, regardless of what society is saying we should look like, should sound like, should act like, should show up as, like, full radical acceptance of, like, who we are and how we show up and what feels good for us, that's where like the healing begins.
Yeah. That's a really wonderful way to end. Well, thank you so much, Caroline. I really appreciate it. It was great to talk to you.
Yeah. It was truly my pleasure. I can't wait to get some things.
Oh, it was your what?
So
it was your what?
Build your own pleasure. It was my pleasure.